Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. Just before 2 a.m. on the morning of June 25th, 2008, emergency responders in Dorado County, California, received a 911 call from a motorist about a dangerous brush fire. The man had spotted flames and smoke while traveling on Highway 193, just outside the community of Kelsey, in a section of the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, known as the Divide. When Dorado County firefighters were dispatched to the scene about half an hour later, they navigated the winding mountainous rural roads until they spotted the fire down the side of a deep ravine. The area was treacherous, and the already low nighttime visibility was made worse by the abundant smoke. However, slowly but surely, firefighters were able to fight back the flames, which had been steadily creeping up towards the edge of the road. As this went on, the crew was able to make their way further down into the ravine, getting them closer and closer to the source of the blaze. They were about 300 feet down when one of them spotted it, the large and ghostly silhouette of a burning vehicle. When the fire was finally extinguished, firefighters learned that the vehicle in question was a Chevy Suburban SUV. Though the inferno had left the vehicle almost unrecognizable, it hadn't quite managed to destroy everything. This would become disturbingly clear when one of the investigators at the scene took a closer look at the wreckage. As he did, he noticed an unmistakable and hauntingly familiar odor. It was the smell of charred human remains. It didn't take long for authorities to arrive at a hunch as to who this person might be. As it happened, a missing persons report had been filed not too far from here just a few hours earlier. While these suspicions would soon be proven correct, what detectives didn't yet know was that piecing together the rest of the situation would be far less straightforward. They would eventually arrive at a truth so horrible, no one wanted to believe it. Within hours of extinguishing the fire that June morning, detectives at the scene were fairly certain that they had uncovered the identity of the deceased person found inside the burned-out vehicle. Though the flames had burned hot enough that only partial skeletal remains were left, fortunately for investigators, the SUV's vehicle identification number remained legible. The Chevy Suburban was registered to a 54-year-old man named Ron Prespa, a married father and grandfather who lived a few miles away near the community of Garden Valley. This immediately caught the attention of some investigators, who remembered hearing over their radios just hours earlier that Ron had been the subject of a missing persons report the previous night. While the remains would still need to be sent off for DNA testing to confirm the identification, authorities were confident enough to break the tragic news to Ron's wife, 46-year-old Patty Prespa. Patty was the one who had reported her husband missing, notifying police late on June 24th after she said she returned to their Meadowbrook Road home, only to find that he wasn't there. Patty told detectives that she had been out with one of her daughters and grandchildren for most of that afternoon and evening, and the last time she had spoken to Ron had been at around 9 p.m. before she had gotten home, when he called and said that he was going to make a quick trip down to the city of Placerville to run some errands. Ron said that he needed to get some propane for the barbecue and would also pick up some gas for the lawnmower. These details tracked with what authorities had found at the crash scene. Amongst the wreckage of Ron's Chevy Suburban, investigators recovered the remnants of what appeared to be a propane tank. They reasoned that if the 54-year-old had been carrying this along with other fuel, it would explain how the vehicle had burned so violently. This led police to theorize that Ron had accidentally driven off the road, perhaps while trying to avoid an animal or some other kind of obstacle that had caused him to lose control of his SUV. It wasn't all that hard to believe. Though the drive to Placerville was just over 12 miles from Ron and Patty's home, the journey could definitely be dangerous, especially at night. The mountainous terrain in the area creates hazards such as mini landslides and rocks falling into the roadway, and there are minimal guardrails in many places. Police had barely finished breaking the awful news to Patty, though, when they were notified of a development back at the crime scene. It seemed that someone there had found something. Little did they know, it was about to completely change the course of the investigation. While police were notifying the distraught family members of Ron Presba about his tragic death, back at the scene, investigators had been busy trying to piece together the details of what had led up to the crash. Theorizing that Ron might have hit a deer, they began scouring the area where the SUV had gone off the road. However, no animal carcasses were recovered. What investigators did find, though, was blood. Of particular note were two pools of it several inches in diameter, which were located a short distance away from each other on the road. A closer look revealed more blood in the form of droplets that appeared to show a trail. The droplets were in the heaviest concentration where they connected the two pools, but proceeded to get farther and farther apart as they approached the edge of the roadway where Ron's SUV had gone off. Perhaps most curious of all about the two blood pools was a sort of pattern that appeared to have been left in them. Authorities weren't sure what to make of this until one member of the investigative team had an idea. After following the blood trail, they began to carefully walk the path that the SUV had taken as it fell into the ravine. This continued until they spotted something caught in the branches of a manzanita bush. It was a partially charred plastic bag. When the bag was opened, detectives made a horrifying discovery. Inside was hair and blood, as well as bits of human skull and brain tissue. Further analysis would show that this bag was what had left the imprints in the blood found on the roadway. Moreover, DNA testing would confirm that the blood, as well as all of the other remains recovered from the scene, belonged to Ron Presba. While authorities were now more perplexed than ever, two things were abundantly clear. First, Ron Presba was dead before his vehicle ever went off the roadside that fateful night. And second, his death had been no accident. After realizing that they were now dealing with a murder investigation, detectives with the Dorado County Sheriff's Office started to dig deeper into Ron Presba's personal life. Hoping to establish a motive for the crime, they turned to those that knew him best, his friends and family. Unfortunately for investigators, no one could think of any reason why someone would have wanted Ron dead. His wife Patty told them that as far as she knew, he didn't have any enemies, and it seemed like everyone else police spoke to had nothing but nice things to say about him. Ron had been born and raised in the Divide, the aforementioned area of California located in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains between the middle and south forks of the American River. The region is famous for its history during the California Gold Rush, and while that time has long since passed, according to reports, Ron was something of an archetype of the rugged outdoorsman from that bygone era, at least on the outside. Growing up, he'd had all sorts of jobs, from ranch hand to backhoe operator, spending most of his time working as an independent contractor. However, on the inside, everyone knew Ron for his gentle and kind heart. He had a reputation in his church and community as the kind of person who would be there if you needed anything, and one of his greatest passions was gardening on the 2+ acre plot of land he owned, a hobby which he had only recently rekindled shortly before his death. More than anything, though, Ron was a family man. Though his marriages hadn't always worked out, he had been a devoted single father to his 2 daughters while they were growing up. In interviews years later, they recalled how Ron had done his best to fulfill the roles of both mother and father. He worked, cooked, cleaned, and despite his mountain man exterior, apparently knew how to French braid the hell out of some hair. As his daughters grew up, Ron became just as active in the lives of his grandchildren as well. When Ron met Patty, it seemed like his life was complete. The couple took their relationship slow, dating for about 8 years until they quietly got married in August of 2005. Like Ron, Patty had children from previous marriages. Also, much like her husband, Patty was respected in the community. People knew her as outgoing and social, something that worked well for her at her job with the California Conservation Corps. For those unfamiliar, the government organization runs a work program for young adults between the ages of 18 and 25. The Corps members are paid a monthly stipend and work on environmental conservation projects, fire protection, land maintenance, and even help with emergency responses to natural disasters. Patty worked as a supervisor with the CCC, where many of her young Corps members saw her as a nurturing presence. Many would often turn to her if they needed to talk, with some of them even affectionately referring to her as Mom. While all of this information was necessary for detectives to delve into, none of it appeared to point them in any kind of clear direction concerning Ron Prespa's murder. It seemed like the case might be stagnating. That was, until an interview with Ron's daughters, where they learned that Ron and Patty had recently taken in a mysterious house guest. During an interview with investigators, Ron Prespa's daughters revealed that shortly before their father's death, they discovered that he and their stepmother Patty had been letting a young man stay with them in one of the spare bedrooms of their home. The daughters felt this was strange because until they found out about the situation themselves, neither their dad nor Patty had mentioned it to them. They didn't know much more, other than that the house guest was a 21-year-old man named Jaime Ramos. On June 28th, 3 days into the investigation, authorities interviewed Patty a second time at her home and asked about Jaime. She said that she had met him at work. He was enrolled in the Conservation Corps' one-year work program. Patty explained that as she had gotten to know Jaime, she had learned about his troubled upbringing. His mother had taken her own life when he was just 2 years old, and he barely knew his father, who had been imprisoned more or less his whole life. Though Jaime had lived with his grandmother, who had always been a stable presence for him, even she hadn't always managed to keep him safe. Horrifically, he had been abused by an uncle for the better part of 10 years when he was a little boy. When Jaime entered high school, he had yet another traumatic experience. In grade 9, he got close to one of his teachers who he trusted, only for her to eventually turn the relationship sexual. When the teacher cut things off a couple of years later, Jaime didn't know what to do. He showed up at her house pleading with her to take him back, only for her to lock him out and claim that she didn't know him. In a rage, he ended up smashing the sliding glass back door to the residence with a patio chair. She apparently went on with her life, while he landed in juvenile detention on assault charges. Patty said that after meeting Jaime, she could tell that he was truly trying to turn things around for himself. She took him under her wing and began to mentor him. Naturally, when Jaime was close to finishing up his time at the CCC and could no longer stay in their dorms, he turned to Patty for help. She told detectives that she and Ron had agreed that he could stay with them for a few weeks, after which he planned to move to Texas. When detectives asked Patty if she knew where Jaime was now, she gave a disturbing response. She said that she hadn't seen him since the day she reported her husband missing. It seemed that Jaime had chosen an awfully convenient time to go ahead with his moving plans. Understandably, this all looked very suspicious already, though it was about to get a whole lot worse. As investigators were talking to Patty, one of them noticed something in the living room. It was a small amount of blood spatter between the couch and the wall. Forensics teams were quickly brought in, revealing the horrifying truth. Luminol tests showed that blood had been cleaned up all over the house. It was clear that this is where Ron Prespa had been murdered. Upon discovering the chilling crime scene in the Prespa home, authorities turned the bulk of their attention towards finding Jaime Ramos. Because they didn't have any way to reach the 21-year-old, they went to his family, who were eventually able to pass the message along that police wanted to speak with him. Within a few days, Jaime contacted authorities, though denied any involvement in Ron's death. He said that he wanted to help with the investigation, though refused to tell investigators where he was located. Because he was using burner phones, he was difficult to track, and what little information detectives were able to glean seemed to indicate that he was moving constantly. Over the next couple of weeks, Jaime continued to call, with authorities using each interaction as an opportunity to try and build trust. At the same time, the 21-year-old's family members did whatever they could to try and persuade him that his best course of action was to stop running and turn himself in. Coincidentally, it would be during this telephone cat and mouse game that authorities would receive another important call. This one from a man named Curtis Edwards. Though detectives had never heard of Edwards before this, the information he had to share would prove to be an absolute bombshell. When El Dorado County Sheriff's Office detectives sat down with Curtis Edwards, they had no idea what to expect. All Edwards had said on the phone was that he had information that might be useful related to the Ron Prespa case. This turned out to be quite the understatement. During their meeting, Edwards explained that he had been Jaime Ramos's roommate while they were at the California Conservation Corps. He said that Jaime was a nice enough guy, but that he had noticed he was unusually close to one of the supervisors they worked with, Patty Prespa. The two would spend a lot of time together, and Edwards would see them hanging out in the center's office sometimes. On one particular day, Edwards said that he had walked in during a break and saw Patty and Jaime holding hands. The pair quickly let go and were clearly trying to behave casually, though he could sense a strangeness in the room. A little while later, Edwards said that Jaime approached him directly and admitted that he and Patty were dating, pleading with him not to say anything. Edwards said that he thought the age difference between them was a little weird, and he knew that Patty was married, but ultimately he agreed. Edwards hadn't given the situation much thought since then, especially since he was on deployment dealing with wildfires, so he had been away from the center in Greenwood where he was normally stationed. It wasn't until he recently returned that he learned Patty's husband Ron was dead. Understandably, Edwards' information was a massive revelation for detectives, who immediately went to Patty to confront her with what they knew. Initially, she denied that anything had happened between her and Jaime, though she eventually admitted to the affair. Patty said that she and Jaime had been together for several months, over the course of which he had exhibited increasingly troubling behavior. She claimed that she had wanted to get out of the situation several times, though had been terrified about what he might do. Patty explained that a few months before the murder, she had been on a road trip with Jaime, during which she had tried to break things off. She said he responded by dangerously accelerating the car they were in, before steering as if he was going to take them into oncoming traffic. She stated that afterwards, Jaime made it clear to her that if he couldn't have her, no one could. Patty told detectives that she had eventually become so scared and desperate that she came clean to Ron about what was going on. He was understanding and had come up with a solution. They had bought Jaime a car, a green 2003 Hyundai Tiburon, which she said they gave to him so that he could move to Texas and get out of their lives for good. Patty stated that though she never believed Ron was in danger, she now realized that she had been wrong. Not only that, she was convinced that she was next. Chillingly, she said during the interview, quote, "I don't think I'll be alive for long. I'm telling you, he'll come for me. He'll tell you he's coming here, but he'll kill me first." The disturbing statement would take on new meaning just a short time later, when nearly 1 month to the day that Ron Prespa was murdered, Patty also went missing. While their latest interview with Patty Prespa had certainly been illuminating, detectives still weren't sure what to make of her story. After all, when they had questioned her before, she had kept so much from them. Who's to say that she still wasn't holding back more? Around this same time, though, detectives were finally starting to make some progress with Jaime Ramos. After several weeks on the run, the 21-year-old agreed to sit down with them on July 24th. Or so they thought. The same day that Jaime was supposed to come in for questioning, police received a 911 call to the Prespa home. A friend had gone over to check in on Patty, only to stumble across a terrifying scene. When investigators arrived at the property, Patty was nowhere to be found. The house was disheveled, and there was blood all over the place, especially in the bathroom, where a door had obviously been kicked in. A letter found inside the residence appeared to clear up any shadow of a doubt as to what had happened. It was composed of letters that had been cut out of magazines and explained that Patty had been kidnapped. Police immediately released an all-points bulletin about the incident, providing descriptions of Patty and Jaime and asking all available law enforcement officers to lend a hand in the search. It was clear that Jaime likely had a massive head start, though thankfully, authorities would soon catch an extremely lucky break. The following day, roughly 600 miles away in Salt Lake City, Utah, an investigator with the state's Motor Vehicle Enforcement Division, named Mike Paletta, was on duty looking for stolen cars when he stopped by the parking lot of a local Motel 6. While there, he spotted a car with California license plates and decided to run them. The vehicle was a green Hyundai Tiburon, and when Paletta entered the information into the system, he got a hit with the National Crime Information Center. The car was linked to a homicide in California. Paletta barely had time to call for backup and contact his counterparts in Dorado County before he saw someone walk out of one of the motel rooms and head towards the car. It was a woman who quickly confirmed that her name was Patty Presba. Before officers could go inside her room, Patty gave them a warning. She said that Jaime was inside and that he had been shot. Sure enough, when police entered the room, they found the 21-year-old lying in bed. He had suffered 3 gunshot wounds, one to an arm, one to a leg, and one to the collarbone area of his upper chest, and was barely conscious due to blood loss. All he could manage to say was, quote, "Don't shoot. I've already been shot." While Jaime was taken to a hospital, police had a chance to question Patty. She explained that just like she had feared, Jaime had come to finish her off and had kidnapped her from her house. She said that during the initial attack, she had managed to shoot the 21-year-old 3 times, though somehow he had still overpowered her. However, there was a problem with Patty's story. It didn't make any sense. If she was the victim of a kidnapping, why had she been walking around freely at the time police found her? Jaime was obviously in no state to physically overpower her, so at the very least, why hadn't she called for help? Of course, by this time, detectives had their own theory as to why. It was one that they had been sitting on for a while now, but there was only one person who could confirm it. When Jaime Ramos had recovered enough that he could finally speak with investigators, they brought him in for an interview. It was here that detectives revealed that they knew about his affair with Patty Presba, and said that they were fairly certain he had been involved in her husband's murder. They also explained that the way Patty was telling it, she was completely innocent, and Jaime was responsible for everything. Of course, investigators didn't actually believe this. In fact, at this point, they no longer believed anything that Patty had to say. This was because once again, they had caught her in a lie. It happened after Patty first informed police about the car she claimed she and Ron had bought for Jaime so that he would leave them alone. Detectives had since obtained surveillance footage from the dealership where the green Hyundai was purchased. When they reviewed it, they saw that Patty and Jaime had gone there together, and it was clear from their level of physical contact that they were still very much in an intimate relationship. Presented with the reality that Patty was trying to throw him under the bus for everything, Jaime finally agreed to come clean about what had happened. In an emotional interview, the 21-year-old broke down, admitting that he was the one who had killed Ron Presba. He said that he had done it for Patty, and that he was completely in love with her. Jaime described how after meeting Patty, he felt like he finally had someone that truly cared about him in his life. She was a combination mother figure and lover, someone who had both taken care of him and that he enjoyed being with. When they started dating, they would go on romantic trips together. Eventually, they started talking about being together forever. However, that's when the complications started. After learning of Jaime's tragic life story, one day Patty said she wanted to share a dark secret of her own. She said that her husband Ron was physically and sexually abusing her. What was worse, she said, none of her children or family members believed her. Given his own history with abuse, Jaime was outraged by what Patty was telling him. He told her that she needed to get divorced, to leave Ron, to find an apartment, to live with her kids, anything. But Patty always gave him a reason why she couldn't go through with it. That's because the real reason was that all of Patty's abuse allegations were made up. None of it was true, though at the time, Jaime didn't know this. Eventually, Patty started to make it clear that she felt there was only one way to deal with the situation. Ron needed to be out of the picture permanently, but they needed to make it look like an accident. After that, she said, they could be together forever. To convince Jaime that she was serious about this promise, on one of their secret weekend getaways, Patty prepared a little wedding ceremony where they exchanged engagement rings. Afterwards, she told Jaime that he was her real husband now. A few weeks later, she took him to Las Vegas on another trip, calling it their honeymoon. Jaime claimed that despite what Patty had told investigators, it was she who was possessive, not him. Case in point, that so-called terrifying experience in the car she had previously told them about. In her telling, it was Jaime who had flown off the handle when she had ended the relationship. However, Jaime said that what had really happened was that Patty had freaked out when he got a phone call from an old girlfriend. Yes, he had done the dangerous maneuver in the car during the fight, but he said that at that moment, it was because he could no longer handle the mind games. One moment, Patty could be the most loving person in the world, showering him with care and affection. But the second Jaime wasn't doing what she wanted, her demeanor changed immediately. Knowing that he desired her affection more than anything, Patty would always eventually get what she wanted. So it was that after several months of continuously saying that she needed her husband Ron dead, Patty was able to convince Jaime to help her. That being said, he had a condition. He needed to meet Ron first to see if what Patty had said about him was true. That's why he had moved into their house. When he did, almost immediately, Jaime said, he could tell that something was off. The way Patty described it, her husband was a monster. From Jaime's perspective, though, Ron showed him nothing but kindness. He was funny, made lots of jokes, and never raised his voice. He took an interest in Jaime's life and shared parts of his own, teaching him a little bit about how to use the hand tools and other equipment he owned. At night, the two of them would watch TV together. Despite this, Jaime told investigators, Patty was undeterred. He explained that the entire time she continued on with planning Ron's murder, until finally, the night arrived to put things into action. On June 24th, Patty went out, leaving Jaime and Ron at home. Jaime's instructions were clear. He was supposed to lure Ron out to a specific place on the property, attack him, and then stage the traffic accident like they had planned. That evening, they communicated through burner phones, which Patty had acquired. However, as the hours went on, Jaime had second thoughts. He told Patty that he wasn't sure that he could go through with it anymore. When he did, he said Patty accused him of not loving her. She said that if he was going to follow through, he should do it now. Otherwise, Jaime should leave forever. With the thought of losing Patty being too much, Jaime stated that eventually he worked up the nerve to carry out the murder. He grabbed a small sledgehammer, walked up behind Ron while he was watching TV, and hit him over and over again. As he did, he convinced himself that all of the abuse stories Patty had told him were real, channeling the anger he had from his own years of experiences. Heartbreakingly, Jaime said that Ron seemed so confused when he attacked. His last words were to ask him why he was doing what he was doing. After the murder, Jaime dragged Ron's body to his SUV, managing to get him inside with great difficulty. He then cleaned up as much as he could inside the house, throwing several items, including a carpet and Ron's chair, inside of the vehicle with them. He drove to the part of the road where they had planned to stage the accident, making use of the gasoline and propane inside the SUV to get the fire going before pushing the vehicle into the ravine. It was only after Jaime had accomplished this that he realized he had made a mistake. A small plastic bag with remains from the crime scene cleanup had fallen out of the SUV and onto the road. He picked up the bag and ran towards the edge, hurling it as far as he could towards the wreckage, hoping that the fire would take care of it. In the process, leaving behind the remnants and bloodstain evidence investigators had later found. As if all of this wasn't twisted enough, the story still wasn't over. When detectives had discovered that Ron's death hadn't been an accident, Jaime said that Patty had devised a new plan, only this time, she hadn't shared the full details with him. While Jaime was aware that Patty wanted to stage a kidnapping, he didn't know that she was setting him up to take the fall. As they were staging the house to look like a crime scene, she had instructed him to kick down the bathroom door. When he did, he came face to face with Patty on the other side, who was holding a handgun. She proceeded to shoot him 3 times. In a cruel twist of fate, Jaime had now found himself in the exact same position as Ron Presba, bleeding, terrified, and at a complete loss as to why this was happening to him. As he slumped to the floor, Patty aimed the gun at his head. She pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. She then turned and started to leave the house. Even at this point, Jaime said he still couldn't shake his feelings for Patty. When he managed to make it outside, she allowed him to get in the car and come with her. As soon as he did, he said she acted like everything was okay again, even saying that she didn't mean to shoot him. However, there was one final bombshell that Jaime still had left to share. He told investigators that he now knew the reason that Patty had planned all of this in the first place. She wanted the payout from Ron's $150,000 life insurance policy. A policy which paid double if his death was the result of an accident. Though obviously Jaime's account of what had happened was a lot to take in, the more investigators looked into it, the more they believed he was telling the truth about everything. Not only that, but they eventually had other witnesses come forward who claimed that they had been asked by Patty if they knew anyone who could help her commit a murder. While Jaime agreed to testify against Patty following her arrest, he ultimately wouldn't get the chance. Just days before her trial was set to begin in February of 2010, she pleaded guilty both to her husband's murder and for attempting to murder Jaime. She was sentenced to 42 years to life. Jaime also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 years to life. I'll be honest, even for someone like me that researches and writes about true crime constantly, the murder of Ron Presba is one of the darkest stories I've ever heard. Here's someone who by all accounts was wonderful and kind to everyone, whose life was destroyed by the one person who was supposed to love him more than anyone else in the world. Making matters even more tragic is the fact that apparently Ron wasn't at all naive about what was going on around him. According to interviews we came across with his daughters and other family members, Patty's relationship with Jaime was far from the first time she had been unfaithful to him. In a lot of ways, the two men seem to have had experiences in common. Apparently, much like with Jaime, Patty also seemed to have a strange control over Ron that his family could never quite understand. Speaking of Jaime, yes, what he did was absolutely awful, but I think there's a strong argument to make that in some ways, he was a victim here as well. I'm not saying that he shouldn't be in prison or anything, but I mean, given his history, it's hard to feel like the guy ever really had a chance. Anytime he tried to find the love and nurturing he was so desperately craving, he seemed to get victimized all over again. In particular, the way that Patty tapped into his history of trauma and weaponized it to her own advantage is just so unbelievably sinister that even at the moment of recording this, I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around it. The thing that hit me about this more than anything was when I was doing the research about Jaime's confession. Towards the end of the interview, he says that even after everything, he still loves Patty and asks if he can see her again. At the time of this recording, both Jaime Ramos and Patty Presba remain incarcerated. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.